Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome back to our Fall Gardener's Toolbox series. I'm Carol Waters. I'm the County Director in West Potawatomi. And with us tonight is Dr. Donald Lewis, ISU Extension Entomologist. And Donald, you're going to talk a little bit about those home invaders for this fall.
Exactly. And when we're done with that, we'll talk about whatever else you want to ask about. So if you have a question about an insect that you've seen lately or something you're worried about, go ahead and we'll take those questions at the end. But we're going to go right into the presentation part of this and talk about home invaders. That is, those insects that are indoors accidentally. Now, there are lots of insects that live indoors, but we're going to talk about the ones that start out outdoors and then wander in by mistake. So we call them accidental invaders, we call them occasional invaders, but the point is they cannot survive for all the time, or they cannot reproduce and perpetuate indoors because they feed on plants or they feed outdoors on something else, and they spend most of their life outdoors. But then usually in the adult stage, they will wander inside during that particular portion of their life. The important things to remember right off the bat: they do not reproduce inside. The Boxelder bugs, the ladybugs that have grown and developed out in your garden all summer, may come into the house in the fall of the year, but they cannot go through another generation. So in the terms of accidental invaders, what you see is what you get. Now, the other thing is they annoy us. They are a nuisance. They are hated, but they're not really going to hurt anything. They don't feed on the house. They don't feed on your fabrics. They can't get into your stored foods. So they really just are a nuisance in the house. Now, why do they come inside? Part of it is just wandering, that they will be moving through their environment. They're crawling around outside. Sometimes they're crawling with nowhere to go and all day to get there, and they bump into the house. They find a crack or an opening, and they just wander in by accident. Some of them are wandering into a situation because of a natural instinct, and we'll talk about that when we talk about ladybugs. Some of them are really trying to escape hostile conditions. We have some that are just attracted to lights, that because you have a lot of bright light shining on the outside of your house, they may be attracted to that. And then finally, I think these insects wander inside just for the heck of it. Now, nowhere in that list of causes do you see they know winter is coming, therefore they are purposefully attempting to get inside where it will be warm. Wow, that puts a lot of intelligence into the tiny brain of an insect to believe that they can predict the weather. They can predict that it's going to get cold. They also somehow know that your house will be warm when the garden is cold. So insects are not coming inside because they know it will be warm. That's just one of those myths that really circulates out there that it can't be true. You can't give insects that much credit to be able to predict the future and to be able to predict what the conditions will be like on the other side of the wall in a few months' time. Now, the other thing I'll say about accidental invaders before we look at some specific examples: by and large, wandering into the house is to the insect's disadvantage. They have very little to gain by getting into your house, and that's especially true if they get into the house, the furnace warms them up, and they crawl around in the middle of winter. During the winter, the insects that are accidental invaders should be hibernating. They should be cold, they should stay cold, they should save their energy for when springtime comes so they can resume activity, mate, lay eggs, and perpetuate the species. If they get inside and burn up their energy over the winter, they have lost their chance to reproduce. So being inside is not to the insect's advantage, and we sometimes forget that these accidents happen for other reasons. Well, the newest accidental invader that we're looking at across the country and across the state is the brown marmorated stink bug. That's a word you just have to practice a few times. It's marmorated. It means marbled. Why didn't they call it the brown marbled stink bug? That's called marmorated. It's not marmalade, it's marmorated. And this was a new pest in Pennsylvania back in 1998. So it's not been here very long, but it is in Iowa and it is in Nebraska. And it is a household pest. Now we'll show you in a little bit, there are other problems with this particular insect, but for most of us, this is just an accidental invader. But it is a stink bug. And just a few things about stink bugs to remind you what you already know. Stink bugs have this very definite shield shape. They're broadest across the shoulders, and then they gently taper to a rounded point on the tail end. They have that broad body, the small head. The name of the family of stink bugs comes from the fact that their antennae have 5 segments. So that's typical of all the stink bugs. And they have this large triangular scutellum, which is the structure that is right behind the thorax. There's this huge triangle that sort of separates the wings and holds them apart. And that scutellum is a distinctive characteristic. So 5 segments in the antennae, a triangular scutellum, and you know what you're talking about then. There are over 200 species of stink bugs in North America. We have probably 12 to 24 different species here in the state of Iowa out of the 5,000 that are found worldwide. So this is a fairly large group. They're called stink bugs for a reason. They do produce a self-defense odor from the thoracic glands, and there are little slits on the underside of the thorax from which they will stink. Some people smell it, some people don't. Sometimes they don't stink at all. If the brown marmorated stink bug is producing an odor, people say it smells like cilantro, which you may or may not like, depending on your preference there. The stink bugs are true bugs. They're in the order Hemiptera, and as master gardeners, that immediately flashed into your mind the life cycle. It's a simple life cycle with the 3 stages, egg, nymph, and adult. And they have piercing, sucking mouth parts. All stink bugs, all true bugs, all Hemiptera can only puncture to feed on the sap of whatever it is they're feeding on. So both the adults and the nymphs have puncturing mouth parts and feed on sap from plants primarily. Most stink bugs are herbivorous and feed on sap from plants. But there is a predaceous stink bug that preys on other insects. And I've had more calls and seen more examples this year of the spined soldier bug. Now, spined soldier bug is a stink bug, but rather than feed on plants, it feeds on other insects. This is a picture that I received in email just a few days ago. There is the spined soldier bug nymph. It's got the yellow colorations, the white spots, the orange and white stripes. It has its blunt little beak stuck into a monarch caterpillar, and it is sucking the juices and the life out of that caterpillar. That's why we call them indiscriminate predators. If they fed on pests, they would just be flat out beneficial. But because they feed on bumblebees and caterpillars and things we want, they may not always be as beneficial as we think. But if you like organic control, you can buy spined soldier bugs and release them in your garden. But this is another stink bug. This is not the one that you see in the house. This is the spined soldier bug, stays outside in the garden. Brown marmorated stink bug is a plant-feeding stink bug, however, and in its native range of the Far East, it is an agricultural pest. That is, it does feed on crops, and by puncturing them and sucking out sap, it causes problems. It got off to kind of a slow start back in 2010, a decade ago. It had been found in 22 states, so in the first 12 years of its existence, it spread out a little bit around the country, but then we started to see a population explosion. We saw large populations back east where it originated. And right now, today, there are brown marmorated stink bug has been found in 46 of the states of the United States so far. It will continue to spread. If you haven't seen one yet, you will someday. This is the map from the group called Stop the Brown Marmorated Stink Bug. And you can see the various colors. The bright red colors are where the brown marmorated stink bug has increased in population size to the point that it is damaging crops. It is feeding on apples and corn and soybeans and vegetables and causing problems for them. The ones in orange are where, yeah, it's feeding on crops, but it's also a household nuisance. Now in Iowa, we have only found the stink bug as a household nuisance. That is, in the fall of the year, after developing outdoors, they wander into the house just like a boxelder bug, except of course they're bigger and they stink. So far we have not seen crop damage, but we expect to see that change here very quickly. There are some other places around the country where they found it, but it's not really even a household nuisance yet, as far as they can tell. So one that is quite variable, but it is now throughout the United States in only 22 years' time. This is how we identify it. It's got that shield shape. It has bands on the antennae, and specifically between the joints of the 4th and 5th segment, and at the joints of the 3rd and 4th segment, there are these obvious white bands. Now, it's obvious when the stink bug is alive. It may not be so obvious after it is dead. They also have these alternating bands on the abdomen, but other insects have that as well. But that combination of looking like a stink bug, having a big triangular scutellum, 5 segments of the antennae, and white bands is how you would identify this particular species. On the underside, they're sort of pale colored, nothing very spectacular there. So you really don't even have to get very close to them to identify that that's where it is. Now in Iowa, we have found brown marmorated stink bug in a handful of counties. It's like 22 different counties, but we have found it from one corner to the other. So except for far northwest Iowa, we assume that it's pretty much distributed statewide. We just haven't had reports of it from everywhere. It feeds as a sap feeder again on almost anything: fruit crops, vegetable crops, trees, shrubs, vines, and flowers. And it also feeds on corn and soybeans. So this is an equal opportunity offender. It has a chance to feed on anything that anybody is growing anywhere in the state. When they do feed, they puncture the plant, they feed on sap. That creates some sort of discoloration, some sort of deformation, knobbiness, maybe speckles, maybe sunken areas where they were feeding. But by and large, if there's been a couple of stink bugs on your tomatoes, on your peppers, on your apples, they're going to be unmarketable. They're probably going to be unusable. So in apples, they produce this kind of a corky spot. In corn and soybeans, they interfere with kernel filling and pollination. They also cause discoloration of the soybeans. So there will be a yield loss and a quality loss in crops as well. It would be bad enough if that were the end of the story. But then in the fall of the year, they come indoors, and often by the tens of thousands. Now, this is an old picture from Pennsylvania where this unfortunate couple is sweeping them up by the bucketful off of their porch. We have not seen this kind of problem in Iowa. Oftentimes people say, I found one. Yes, they can count how many stink bugs. In my house in North Ames, I have caught 12. And that's over a 6-year period. I've got 12 stink bugs inside in my house in 6 years. That's sort of the typical situation in Iowa. Maybe a dozen on the outside, maybe a couple dozen next to your door, but very few on the inside. But that is the problem for households with this particular insect. And if we had higher population numbers, we would see pictures like this where they just simply coat the inside of the house. I'm getting ahead of myself, but one of the things we've always said about accidental invaders is to vacuum them up and throw them away. So or vacuum or sweep them up and discard them. In the case of brown marmorated stink bug, in order to vacuum them up, you first have to get the stink bugs off the handle of the vacuum cleaner. So that's a bit of an irony there that we're using the vacuum cleaner for control and they're already populating the handle of it. So brown marmorated stink bug is sort of the new kid on the block. Right now, we're not expecting any other brand new ones that we haven't already seen, but this is the one that we're still tracking as new. So if you look at our website on brown marmorated stink bug and you see our map, if you're in an area where it hasn't been reported, you can go ahead and do so. I can tell you most counties across the center of the state have reported brown marmorated stink bug. Okay. One of the problems with insects is that there are several things that kind of look alike. And there are things that have overlapping names. The bottom right-hand picture is the squash bug. Squash bug is a sap-feeding pest that feeds on squash and pumpkins. They lay their eggs on the undersides of the leaves. Those eggs hatch into little nymphs that begin feeding on the sap, causing your pumpkin leaves to sort of wilt, turn black, and die. And then in the adult stage, the squash bug is this inch-long, brownish-colored insect. The problem is, there's a great many Iowans who call the squash bug stink bug. It's not a stink bug. It's not even closely related to stink bugs, but apparently some people think it does stink. So when someone says, I've got stink bugs on my pumpkin leaves, they're probably talking about squash bug, and they're not talking about brown marmorated stink bug, but if you see the specimen, you'll know the difference. There's another insect, though, that is a household invader, and that's the one in the top picture. It's called the pine seed bug. And the pine seed bug looks similar to the brown marmorated stink bug, except it's not nearly as wide. It's also an inch long. It's twice as big as the stink bug would be. It has a scutellum, but it has a very small triangular scutellum. It has no white spots in the antennae. It does have these bands around the abdomen, but the pine seed bug lives on sap from pine cones all summer long, and occasionally this will wander into people's houses. So just another one that you might find indoors that is not brown marmorated stink bug. We recognize it because of its inch-long shape. It has these expanded plates. They're called leaf-footed bugs because of that plate in the hind leg. And then they have this white zigzag line across their body. So one that you might see might be accused of being a brown marmorated stink bug, but it's not. Almost nothing new to say about multicolored Asian lady beetle, except the word multicolored has been dropped from the name. Who knew? I thought it was an official name to call it the multicolored Asian lady beetle because that was very descriptive. As you look at this picture, you see some that are red with no spots, and you see some that are red with really prominent spots. And here's orange ones with dinky little spots, and here's an orange one with big spots, even bigger spots on an orange one. Multicolored really described what we saw with the Asian lady beetle. But multicolored Asian lady beetle, a 4-word name, just seems to be too much of a mouthful. So that's been technically dropped, but I'm likely to call it that for the rest of my life because that's how I learned it. They're 5 to 8 millimeters long, which means they're about 1/3 of an inch, which is big for a ladybug, but much smaller than the brown marmorated stink bugs. Color varies, spots vary. The one thing they all have in common is this black mark on a white background on the thorax. If they are coming at you, it looks like a W. If they're walking away from you, it looks like an M. So it's either an M or a W, depending on which way you see the bugs coming. But multicolored Asian lady beetle is beneficial. They feed on aphids in the garden, in the trees, and in the fields all summer long. They go through 2 generations where they reproduce and build up their population numbers. And then in the fall of the year, they move toward the house. They land on the house on the south side in the sunshine on those really bright, warm autumn days, September and October. And when the sun goes down, if they can find a way into the house, they'll crawl in through the siding or through the soffits, and they'll try to spend the rest of their winter inside the house. That overwintering migration is triggered by short days and cool temperatures. I've run into so many Iowans who believe migration of stink bugs is caused by combines. What? Really? You think combines are the reason stink bugs are in your house? No, that's just blaming the farmers for a problem that's not their fault. Most ladybugs, if they were in the soybean fields eating aphids when the leaves were green and when the aphids were there, they have left the field by the time the leaves have senesced, turned brown, and fallen off. There's no reason to stay in the field if there's nothing to eat. But short temperatures, or short days and cool temperatures cause soybeans to mature, and they cause ladybugs to migrate. It also coincides with combine harvesting time in the soybean fields. So this is another myth that it's the combining that causes the stink bugs to wander, and that's not it at all. Well, I'm sorry, the ladybugs. The ladybugs were not introduced into Iowa to help the farmers, by the way. The first multicolored Asian lady beetle was discovered in the state of Iowa in 1994 by a master gardener in Scott County. The first soybean aphids were not found until the year 2000 up in northeast Iowa. We had the lady beetle before we had the soybean aphid. So people who blame farmers for the lady beetle are wrong. You can blame the government if you want to, because there's also this myth that this lady beetle was brought to the United States on purpose to help the farmers, and that's not true with this particular species. There's a longer story to that, but it's not the government's fault. It's not the farmer's fault if you have ladybugs inside your house. What they would like to do is hibernate in the walls of your house, just like in their native country of China, they would hibernate in rock outcroppings on the hillsides. So they would develop in the fields, they would develop in the trees, but they would fly to the hillsides when days got short so they could hide under the rocks and spend the winter in hibernation. Now, we don't have a lot of rocky hillsides in Iowa, so they are attracted to the dominant silhouette on the horizon. So if you're a lady beetle and you fly a little ways up in the air and you start looking around, looking for rocks to hide under, what you're likely to see is the silhouette of the house against the blue sky of the background. And that's what's going to attract them, is that contrasting silhouette on the horizon. Once they get a little closer, they may be attracted to other light-dark elements, so they'll hide under the downspouts, or they'll be behind the shutters and so forth. But that is their innate behavior, is to go someplace where they can hide for the winter. When the furnace comes on, that fools them. They come out of hibernation. They're walking around your house all winter, losing energy, wasting energy, probably dying before they can get back outside in the spring. So a few myths there about ladybugs that we've had to beat down over the years. What can I say about boxelder bugs that hasn't already been said? It's a dangerous thing to bring up, but in some parts of the country, remember these used to be called Republican bugs, and in other parts of the country they were called Democrat bugs, which sort of coincides with election season if you think about them. They move in September and October, and that would be just ahead of our national election. And if you wanted to blame somebody for your problems, number one, you could blame the government. Number two, you could blame the farmers. Aren't they responsible for your problems? And number three, you could blame the other political party. So boxelder bugs are well known for a long, long time. They also really vary from year to year. I go through some years where I get 0 calls about boxelder bugs, and then there are other years when I just get inundated. So boxelder bugs are one that really vary from year to year and from place to place. Actually, ladybugs do too. Boxelder bugs have 2 generations. They feed on sap from trees. Doesn't have to be boxelder trees. They'll feed on all kinds of trees, including and other shrubs and flowers and vines and so forth. Those 2 generations give them the opportunity for a population explosion twice per year. When they come out of the hibernation in the springtime, their populations have been diminished a bit, but when they reproduce, they have a chance to build their population. If it is dry in the spring, at the time of the first population, the first generation, the population increases dramatically. If it is hot and dry in July, the population will increase dramatically. If we get some other combination of weather events, it seems to hold their population down. So if you ask why do we have more some years than others, I would say it's probably because of the weather. Well known, they get into cracks and crevices to hide. They crawl around on the south side of the house. They love to bask in the sunshine. But again, when the sun goes down, when the temperature cools, when they're not getting all that radiant energy warming up their black and red wing covered bodies, they will crawl into cracks and crevices. And if there's a hole in your house, they could be in your walls, they could be in your attic, and from there they can come on into your house whenever they want. So getting in through a gap or a crack is how this all starts. Boxelder bugs have a simple life cycle, and it's interesting to me how few people recognize the boxelder bug nymph. That's all these bright red insects that you see in the left-hand picture and a close-up in the right-hand picture. You'll see these on the side of your house. You'll see them on your irises. You'll see them in your flower beds. You'll see them crawling around on your hostas. You'll find them on your trees. So this is one of those questions you can answer in the middle of the summer for people when they say, I've got clusters of bright red insects on my plants. What should I do? The answer is they're boxelder bugs. Don't do anything now. Worry about them later. The adult boxelder bug is still bright red under its black wings. So that bright red abdomen shouldn't surprise you if you've ever looked at the abdomen of the adult. They were also bright red under there as well. A couple of others just to sort of finish this up before we take your questions about whatever else you want to know. There's a group of beetles called ground beetles, and this is tens of thousands of species that live outside on the ground, hence the name ground beetles. But they fly, and they fly very well, and they are attracted to lights. And so lots of different ground beetles may wander into your house. Now, they can be as small as 1/4 of an inch. They can be as large as about 3/4 of an inch. They're all just ground beetles that have been attracted to lights and gotten into your house that particular way. Ground beetles are beneficial because they feed on other insects, but when they're at your porch light, when they're coming in around your screen door, you may not think so kindly of them. But these black two-tone beetles are easy to recognize. They kind of have a distinctive size and shape and configuration, but because they're so variable in size, it's a little hard to do. But ground beetle is one of those that you'll be able to recognize as an accidental invader, sweep or vacuum them up and throw them back outside. Harder to sweep up are the migrating masses of millions of millipedes. This is just one of the huge horror stories for some people, is that they live in an area where there's a lot of millipedes out in the decaying organic matter around their house. And sometimes in the spring, but more often in the fall, millipedes will start wandering. And they wander at night when the humidity is high. They can come across the road from the CRP fields. They can come from the woodland nearby. They can come from your retaining wall. They can come from your mulched flower bed. And they just start wandering and they bump into the house. And sometimes they get in the house under the door. They especially like to get under the garage door. And some of us get to see a few of these. There are some unfortunate homeowners who have seen millions of millipedes wandering into their house. Millipedes are beneficial because they feed on decaying organic matter. But when they're making these long distance migrations and accumulating outside your house, accumulating on your driveway, coming in through the sliding glass door at your walkout basement, it's no longer fun. It's no longer beneficial. Control for this one is very difficult, just like it is for all the other accidental invaders. What we would like to do is back up to where the accidental invaders came from. Well, the boxelder bugs came from your trees. You're not going to spray there. The multicolored Asian lady beetles came from your garden and from the field. You can't spray enough insecticide there to control them before they migrate. Millipedes come from sometimes pretty distinct locations like a retaining wall. Maybe we could go back there and spray an insecticide and it would kill them before they migrate, but that's pretty iffy. The problem with our perimeter sprays, the insecticides that you would spray around the outside of your house, we don't have anything that kills insects, and especially we don't have anything that kills millipedes quickly. So I can put down a barrier of insecticide around my house. The millipedes will crawl through it, they'll get in my house, and they'll die 12 hours later. If I hadn't sprayed, they would have crawled into my house and they would have died in half a day because it's so dry. Remember, millipedes live in damp locations where they can feed on decaying organic matter. So sprays for as a barrier really aren't very effective unless you could do something like spray your entire lawn to try to stop them from migrating. Migrating millipedes is one of the worst accidental invaders. Fortunately, it doesn't happen often, and it doesn't happen to the severe degree that we've talked about so far. Let's finish up and talk about talking about spiders. You know, spiders are not insects because they have 8 legs and they have the 2 body regions. Spiders also have simple eyes, and they'll have either 6 eyes or 8 eyes. To an entomologist or to a naturalist or to a master gardener who really wants to know their spiders, you'll learn how to stare into the face of a spider with your magnifying glass, and you'll get real close to it, and you'll be able to count their eyes, and you'll be able to see the pattern of their eyes. Most spiders have 8 eyes, and their 8 eyes are in 2 sets of 4. There's a front row and there's a back row, or if you're looking down from the top, there's a top, or if you're looking from their face, there's a top row and a bottom row. So you look at those 2 rows of spiders, you compare that to your references, and you can make really good progress with spider identification. Spiders gather their food in one of 3 ways. There are spiders like the garden spider that build a web, and they sit in that web and they wait for food to come to them. So they're very patient. They build the web, they catch something overnight. The garden spider chews up the web, recycles the protein, and makes a new web the next day. It's now sticky again, not covered with dust and dew, and the spider will go back to snaring its food. This is true of all spider webs. They're there, the cobwebs in the corners of your house are there to snare food. There are spiders that are active hunters. They run after their food. They chase food like a fox, or they chase their food like a grizzly bear. They run after it, they pounce on it, they catch it, they snare it, and they eat it up that way. Then there are spiders that are passive hunters, like the crab spider in the bottom left picture. These just sit and wait. Crab spiders that you see on flowers are an example of that. They often camouflage. Here's a golden colored crab spider on a goldenrod flower, and just sitting waiting for a fly to come along, or a bee or some other insect will visit that flower. The crab spider is there to grab it and eat it. So they are also very patient, just sitting and waiting. The common active hunter that is also an accidental invader in the house is the wolf spider. Wolf spiders are big spiders. When they're fully grown, their body may be as big as an inch. If you add the legs, they may be as big as the palm of your hand, but we always measure spiders only by their body size. So inch long, 3/4 of an inch long spider that's brown in color, slightly fuzzy, it's probably a wolf spider. And they are active hunters. So all day and all night, they are chasing through your landscape, running after food. And sometimes they run into a crack under the door. They come in around the windows. They can get into the house by accident because they were looking into the cracks and gaps to see if there was something to eat in there. Wolf spiders are good mothers. If you want a reason to love these spiders, they are good mothers. They also make good pets. You can keep them in captivity. They're not at all dangerous. The top left picture shows a wolf spider female carrying her egg sac She carries the eggs with her until they start to hatch. Then the bottom right picture shows the mother spider with her spiderlings on her back. She is carrying them around for a while until they grow and get enough strength to go off on their own. When we look at wolf spiders, we see those 2 rows of eyes. The bottom row has 4 very small eyes. The top row has 4 eyes in the shape of a square, and the middle 2 eyes in the top row are very large. So maybe in this picture you can even see it. Here's the top row with 4 eyes. 1, 2, 3, 4. It kind of makes a square, and the top row of eyes are very large. In this one, maybe you can see there's also 4 eyes in a square that are large on the top of the cephalothorax. That's how you would identify a wolf spider. The size should have given it away, the fuzziness, the brown coloration, but there are dozens of wolf spiders, but they all have that same eye pattern. Now, the other active hunting spider that you may find indoors is the jumping spider. Hundreds of these in North America. They're cute little spiders because they hold their legs very close to their body, and just about the time you get up close to them, they turn and they look at you. It's alarming. It's disconcerting that this spider just turned to face me. And when they face you, you can see these huge eyes in the bottom row. In the jumping spiders, it's the bottom row of eyes that have these huge eyes with very good vision that can see things far away. Jumping spiders are accurately named. They have very good jumping ability. This one called Phidippus is a very common one. These shining green fangs are kind of a nice adornment. But look at the size of those eyes on the front of that spider. They have nice colorations on the back. Sometimes the coloration almost looks like a face, which is a little alarming. But here are the 2 rows. The front row has 4 large eyes, but the middle ones are really big. The back row has 4 eyes, but it's really hard to see the middle ones. That's why they're in red in this particular color picture. Okay, so wolf spiders, jumping spiders, common indoor accidental invaders because of the way they hunt for food. Well, in summary, what are you going to do about any of these accidental invaders, whether it's spiders, ground beetles, millipedes? Number 1, seal them out. Management is 3 little words: build them out. What can I do to weatherproof my house? What can I do to caulk the windows? What can I do to seal up gaps at the eaves? What can I do to have better fitting doors and windows? How do I get my sliding glass door in the basement to seal shut in a better manner? So whatever you're doing for winterizing, do more of it to keep out these accidental invaders. We can't prevent all of them from entering. I've got a neat story about ladybugs. Friends of mine up near Fort Dodge built a house 10 years ago that on the day it was built, it was declared as the most energy efficient house in Iowa. They built it themselves. They had done everything possible to seal it up. Extra thick walls, extra foam insulation, extra caulking, double pane windows. Everything was sealed up as tight as it could be to be as energy efficient as possible. They have ladybugs inside their house out in the country. So you can't seal them out completely, but let's make it as hard as possible for them to get in. Some insects are attracted to lights. We would like to reduce outside lighting, but sometimes we can't do that as well as we might like. If you're going to try an insecticide, make sure it's one that's labeled for the outside of the house. Make sure it's one that is going to be labeled for that particular pest, knowing it's not going to work very well. Most of the insecticides that people use are going to be ready to use, things like home defense. Sure, I can spray the gap between my foundation and siding. I can spray a little band alongside my foundation. It's probably not going to do much good, and it's especially not going to do much good if I spray it in the sunny side of the house. These insecticides break down very quickly in UV light. So the residual pyrethroids, things like bifenthrin and cypermethrin that we use in the garden, use them in your flowers, use them on your fruit trees, they do as well as anything. it's just not a good option to use insecticides for control of accidental invaders. So 3 little words, build them out. Hey, I reached the final slide. I have moved. I'm no longer in the building where I spent the first 40 years of my career. I've moved across the street to Science Hall 2. I'm now on the 6th floor looking out the north window. From my building on campus, I can see the town of Gilbert on a clear day. My address is drlewis@iastate.edu. And if you dial the 515-294-1102, it comes straight to my office. I'm not there, except tonight. I'm in my office tonight. But generally, I'm working from home because of the coronavirus pandemic. I'm staying away from campus as much as possible. So it's much easier to reach me by email should you want to do so. Okay, what time is it? Good grief, I lasted 41 minutes. I'm going to stop there and see what questions you might have.
So the chat box is open and the question and answer box is open. If you have questions that don't pertain to home invaders, you can throw those out too.
We'll take them all.
Everybody's quiet tonight, Dr. Lewis.
Oh, I just bored them to sleep.
I doubt that.
You know, I'm better than an instruction manual for falling to sleep at night.
Okay, so 2 questions have come through, or 3. Okay, great. One, Denise Key wants to know, I've seen a spider in my house with purplish legs. Small spider seems harmless.
Probably is. You know, if we were on the phone, I would ask a few more questions like, okay, the legs are purple, but what color is the body? And where in the house do you see it? I'm guessing it's got a light yellow color and you see it at the junction between the ceiling and the roof. And they may be hiding in that little gap, in which case it's probably a sac spider. Sac spider is spelled S-A-C. There's no K in sac spider. They're common household spiders and they live indoors year round. They're also a small spider in terms of, you know, 3/16 of an inch at most. So sac spider would be my guess. This would also be my plug to say, anytime you aren't sure of an identification, you can send me a very good picture. That email we used earlier, drlewis@iastate.edu. You just take a picture with your cell phone, attach it to an email and shoot it to me. When you're taking pictures with your cell phone, remember there are 3 criteria that picture must meet. Make the picture as close as possible, but criterion number 1 is the picture must be in focus. Criterion number 2, the picture must be in focus. And criterion number 3, the picture must be in focus. So send me a good picture. I can probably give you a good answer. If you send me a bad picture, I'll send you a bad answer. It's just that simple, folks.
All right, next question. What is being done with the invasive pests in our state?
Invasive species are regulated by the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship. Now, we work very closely with them, and they work very closely with their network around the country. The plant introduction people are always in communication, and we're in on that as well. So things like the Asian longhorn beetle that is in Ohio, Massachusetts, and Maryland, I think, we know it's there. We are watching it. We are paying attention to it. We are in communication with the people who are fighting that invasive insect. We are encouraging them to remind people not to move firewood. And so we're paying attention, watching for things to arrive. We watched for the emerald ash borer for 8 years before it arrived in Iowa. And we knew where to look because we were in contact with all the other states. State of Wisconsin reported it on the Mississippi River, right across from Allamakee County. So our efforts were focused in that area, and sure enough, in 2010, we found emerald ash borer in the state of Iowa for the first time because we were waiting and watching and looking. Beyond that, we participate at a distance mostly with the U.S. Department of Agriculture on their import permits. There are things you cannot bring back to the United States, like fruits and vegetables from other countries. And if you do, they will be confiscated at your port of arrival. Goods coming in from other countries are randomly inspected by the USDA people. So there's a lot of effort going into this, but brown marmorated stink bug got here, spotted winged Drosophila got here, the emerald ash borer got here, Japanese beetle got here back in 1994. So insects get here in spite of our efforts to watch for them, to talk about them, and to teach, and also our help with the federal inspectors.
All right, next question is from David. Is boric acid a good barrier?
No. Boric acid has a very specific mode of action. And the mode of action is that the dry powder sticks to insects and then interferes with a metabolic activity. Boric acid is a very slow death for insects, but boric acid has to stay dry in order for insects to pick it up as they walk through it. So boric acid works very well if I can put it in the cracks and crevices under my kitchen sink where the cockroaches will be in contact with it. But as soon as that boric acid gets wet, if it starts to cake up, if it's no longer a fine powder, it doesn't stick to the insects, so it no longer works. So if I put boric acid around the outside of my house, it's going to draw damp and it's not going to be effective. So boric acid has good uses, but very specific indoor uses only.
Okay. Next question, what can I do about crickets?
You know, crickets would have been a good one to add to, to this list. I don't hear about crickets like I used to. I don't hear crickets like I used to, but that's probably my old age and my loss of hearing. It just seems like we don't have the cricket outbreaks that my grandmother and my mother complained about. But they can happen, and it's the same story. Every cricket, every boxelder bug had to crawl through a gap in your foundation, a gap in your siding, a gap around a window or door. So it's the same story to seal up cracks and gaps. Old farmhouses with leaky foundations is probably an impossible task to keep all the crickets out, but crickets are an annoyance, and that's one where my grandmother used to complain about them feeding on fabrics, and they would get into her stored onions and so forth. But I just don't hear those tales anymore about crickets getting into the house. So I don't think to add that one to the list, but everything we've said about accidental invaders applies to crickets as well.
Okay. The next question is, we've had oodles of millipedes this year, lived in the same house last summer and didn't notice any. Are these also in different numbers depending on the year and weather?
Yes, millipedes develop in damp areas where they can feed on decaying organic matter. And so you would think a drought year would reduce their population. Now, the other thing we'll mention is that those millipedes that I showed you that are almost an inch long, slender body, slender cylindrical body with 4 pairs of legs on each body segment, those inch-long millipedes are a year old. So they didn't grow in relation as a coincidence of this year's weather. They probably grew as a coincidence of last year's weather. So we have to kind of think back. Was it wetter last year? Was there more organic matter? Did we get moisture at just the right time? Our environments usually don't change that much. The retaining wall stays the same. The mulch in my flower bed stays the same. But weather could be a big factor in determining the number. The other thing is reproduction is a random event. And some years insect populations reproduce like crazy and we get lots of them, and other years they don't reproduce quite as much. So what's been the population of monarch butterflies in your county this last week? I saw more monarch butterflies this last week than I think I saw in the last 2 years combined. So populations do vary from place to place, from year to year, often for purposes we can't fully explain, but that doesn't stop us from waving our hands and making up stories about why populations change. It's just the nature of things.
So would the flood of last year influence that?
You know, I don't think it's going to be quite as dramatic as flooding.
Okay.
Flooding is a lot of water in one place at one time. If that water were to disappear and that area turned dry, the millipedes aren't going to be favored. But if there was periodic wetting, as in a flood, and then there was rain, and then there was a leaky downspout, if that area stayed wet, that would favor the millipedes. But not a one-time temporary event. This has to be stretched over a longer season.
Sure. Someone has asked, is that a bug professor eye test chart on the wall behind you?
Yes, it is. And thank you. You know, it came to my office so the scenery would be a little more exciting than it is at home. Let's see if I can switch a little bit. Yeah. Yes, over there. How do I point? This one. It really is a bug eye chart. There's a big beetle at the top. It's a poster that is made by an insect artist, that once you start looking for decorations that involve insects, once you start looking for neckties that have insects on them, you find this stuff, or people find it and give it to you. So yes, that's what that is. The next to it is a hanging of, it's kind of hard to see in the picture, but it's 4 sacred scarabs mounted on little pieces of wood. Under that is another scarab, and next to that's a green close-up picture of the spot on a Luna moth's wing. All of those are projects that students do in my undergraduate course. They can write a term paper, they can write a newspaper article, they can do a painting, they can do a sculpture, they can do a drawing. And those are projects that students have turned in over the years.
Nice. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions and our time's almost up. So Dr. Lewis, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
My pleasure, thank you. And thank you for being master gardeners. We always look forward to seeing what kind of volunteer projects you put together out there. So stay in touch.
All right, and for those who are interested, our next Gardener Toolbox is in 2 weeks on October 1st. And you'll have me again talking about holiday plants. So we'll talk about all those plants that we get at the holidays and how to take care of them and what to do with them when the holidays are done. So until then, have a great couple of weeks and we'll see you on October 1.
Stay safe. Bye-bye.